a monk at the Japanese temple, so he might be very interested. He has an interesting talk about around that area. So Martin Huges.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can figure out how to work this thing now. Okay.
Just for a while, for time being.
Anyway, my name is Martin Huges, and I'm going to be talking, the theme that we presented is the history and development of Buddhism in Japan. That is the basic theme, and rather than boring you with minute details that you would soon forget, I've decided actually in the same theme to focus more on the Japanese religious mind in general. And by that, as I will hope to explain in this first hour, the second hour will be open to question and answers. In this country there are basically 6 different religions. Now I will talk about each of them. Buddhism is the most, is more like the umbrella religion over all of these. All of these exist in some form or another, but Buddhism is by far the most dominant of all of these religions. Now these are not practiced, say, like religions in America or the West, where one religion is living side by side, or one sect is next to another, but not really overlapping. These are all intermingled and sometimes very difficult to distinguish from each other. So rather than say a religious mosaic, it's more of actually a religious melting pot. It's sort of a religious stew, if you might. They all mix together, and the nice thing about this is that there is very little conflict among these religions. There is very little conflict, and this is one reason why I like Japan, or the Japanese religious mind. And so each of these religions, they each fit a different need for the Japanese people. And for example, one look at this. Folk religion, for example, is hardly practiced, but they are not consciously practiced. Most of these religions that you see on this board, people do not say, I am a Taoist or I am a Confucianist. These are generally things that Japanese people feel unconsciously, or they participate in unconsciously. They don't think that the way we do in the West, in that this is their own religion and they are doing this consciously and as apart from, say, other activities. Now the first one, folk religions, this one is the weakest of all Japanese religions. And so there is nobody in Japan today that claims to be a member of any folk religion. Nobody is a member of a folk religion. However, the largest or the biggest ceremony of the year, or the biggest holiday of the year, it has its origins in Japanese folk religions, and that is the New Year's. Now they do various things. And that's on January 1st, and they have several days for a holiday. Okay. Is this going to work? Okay. So the best example is that of New Year's, and that is sort of like their Thanksgiving and Christmas mixed in to the same day. They take several days off, they clean the house, they start over. It's our version of spring cleaning. They have a couple of days off from work, but it's a very difficult time for the Japanese because they thoroughly clean the house from top to bottom. It's January 1st, it's very cold. I do what I can to avoid such activities. The next one is Taoism. That also has probably has actually more influence on this culture. Taoism came from China, of course, It's spelled with a T. Some people pronounce it Taoism, but generally it's Taoism. And again, a very sublime yet pervasive influence, and it deals, what can I say, mostly with architecture, which way the building faces. There are certain directions that good or bad luck comes in, and which side of the building do you put a pond on, which direction do you put your head when you sleep at night, northeast, west, south. Each direction has its own special meaning, and so you've got architecture and you've got the calendar. Again, this is from Taoism, the ancient Japanese calendar. So for example, if you decide when you're getting married or when you're going to open a company or start a new business or anything like that, you consult with a traditional calendar, and there are basically lucky and unlucky days. So of course you don't get married on an unlucky day. And also fortune telling, very big business in Japan, even more so than in the States. Again, just a kind of horoscope, and this is again from Taoism. And also you've got acupuncture and so on, which are herbal medicines, things like that, which are greatly influenced by Taoism. And Taoism, basically, as it is so-called, again, in Japan, nobody claims to be a Taoist, but it influences daily life in this country. And comes from China, and as it is practiced by a few people in China, it is, I mean, nowadays, as it is practiced, it is a very superstitious religion, sort of a nature worship, and with very bizarre beliefs, I guess one should say. From one of the latest documentaries I've seen on NHK, which is Japanese public broadcasting, about the Taoists living in Chinese mountains. They don't eat vegetables and they don't eat meat. They don't eat anything that might possibly give them gas. Because gas for them is expelling life force. That's a great way to shorten your lifespan. And so, very bizarre superstitions by people that are sincere about Taoism. Now, of course, Taoism in the West is more, as we understand it, more of a nature appreciation. Even that has, in many cases, at least Taoist literature is well known in the States for people who are familiar with poetry and so on. Even Henry David Thoreau had his own commentaries and did some of his own translations about Taoism. But again, nobody in Japan, I've never met anybody in Japan that claims to be a Taoist. It's just sort of a nature appreciation thing that now has really degenerated into a very superstitious religion, if you can call it that, and one can barely call it a religion. The next is Confucianism. That also has a very profound effect on Japanese society, and the structure in this society, as well as Korea, which is even more pronounced, and in China, is it's a Confucian society. Now this can barely be perceived as a religion. It is basically a social structure, and how government should be run, and what is the ideal position, and each family member's, what can I say, role in the family and in society is determined by Confucianism. This is where it originally was set up. Now that means basically that males have more priority over females, and the eldest son is the one in charge of taking over the family and carrying on the responsibility. So he has more responsibility and status or respect than, say, the youngest son or any daughter, and in turn the eldest daughter has more status than, say, any younger daughters. The male is always the nominal head of the house.